Hey, well, hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree here today with another episode of the Simply Inspired podcast. And today I'm joined by a very, very special guest. Really privileged to have Mr. Oliver Browne on the show today, Mountaineer, former professional polo player. This man has an incredible journey through transformation, through adventure. So, as always, with my interviews and podcasts, we're not only going to be talking about sports and about physical achievements, but we're actually going to be focusing on mindset, transformation, recovery, which is another very key theme today, and quite a bit more. So stay tuned, everyone. And Oliver, thank you for coming on the show and thank you for making time for this because I know how busy you are. So I really appreciate it more, given that fact as well. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be asked. I think when you get asked, it's a sign that something is going well. You've done something right. So it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Absolutely. Well, definitely, in terms of doing things right, I agree with that because obviously there's your own journey of transformation and healing and recovery, but there's also the impact you're having on other people through that as well, which is amazing. So we'll talk about all of that. But before we do, to give people a little bit of background about yourself and everything like that, as I understand it, you were a professional polo player for some years. And I'd like to start with that part of the story. I'm assuming that that's where your sporting interests as a whole started with polo. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I mean, just a bit of a before that. I mean, I grew up in a kind of very nice, like rural part of Hampshire. My dad was a doctor. My sister, sorry, my mum was a housewife. We had a very kind of like normal country existence. We had ponies. We didn't really know anything about polo. My parents weren't particularly horsey, but my sister's got a pony at some point. I started riding, and at some point I started playing polo as a teenager, just on a very basic level to begin with. Like I never imagined that I would be a professional, but at some point, and I think I probably knew quite as soon as I started playing, in fact, that I was going to be a professional. And I think that's one thing I would say to people that want to play sport professionally is it's something that you have to know. And if you're asking other people whether it's possible, it's so kind of irrelevant because it's just something that's personal to you. So lots of people said, "Oh, you'll never be a professional." When I started saying that was the direction I was going in. Anyway, I ended up being a professional. I played at Guards Polo Club in Windsor Great Park, the biggest polo club in Europe, and I managed and played in quite a big team. It was looking back on it now, it was a great time. It was something I wish I could have over again. I think lots of professionals say that they wish they could do it again. I would do things differently, obviously. I would probably try to enjoy it more than, not that I didn't enjoy it. I did enjoy it, but it went past so quickly. And I probably didn't appreciate what a great job, what a great lifestyle it was at the time. And so, yeah, that was my background in sports. I wasn't a great sports person. Otherwise, I played other sports at school, football, rugby. Didn't have any great proficiency, and I wasn't a great professional in polo by any imagination. I was kind of a journeyman, but I was very well organized, and I was very good at creating good teams, and I did the management of the polo as a business very well. So I was lucky to attract this big team that hired me to be one of their pros and their manager. So no, it was a great time. Lots of travel, lots of good people.
Absolutely, some good memories there from the sound of it, but at the same time, as you say, lessons learned along the way. Now, when you stopped playing, this is where, as I understand it, things took a bit of a turn. Now, with all of these questions today, just correct me if I'm ever off with the timeline, because that's always the thing with, this happened and then this happened. But in terms of stopping playing, now with my interviews, I don't dwell on any negativity. So you need to know that up front. It's not like a journalism type thing, or let's probe into that. I'm all about how people come back from things. But in terms of setting the scene for that, obviously we do need to touch a little bit on what happened. So starting at the beginning with that, what was it that was it something specific that forced you to stop playing, or did you just realize within yourself that the time had come?
No, I think it was a combination of factors. The main one being that the team I played in was being disbanded. The guy that owned it, excuse me, he decided he didn't want to play anymore. And so I had this kind of choice to make. Should I continue playing as a freelance? Will I try to get, another job, or should I try and do something completely different? And I think, I'd been having, this kind of feeling that maybe I should try to do something else, that playing polo wasn't going to be forever, that, I saw some of the older professionals, struggling, maybe struggling financially. And I thought, well, I'm 30, I was 34. I was like, well, I can try something new. It's not too late to. And so in hindsight, I could see that I rushed out of it probably a bit too quickly, and I should have continued on some level playing or being involved in management or doing something, because, what happened to me really was I fell out of it. And in falling out of it, and I didn't realize this at the time, I really lost my whole kind of world and my whole identity and sense of purpose and sense of standing. And I think, and also the community that I was in. Suddenly I was kind of like this like rudderless ship that had, and I joined, this financial services company in London gave me a shot, but as a junior, and I was, 34, and I was coming into quite a big organization on this, on the very bottomest rung. And, it was a big shock to me, having been, a key cog in a big organization in a place that, I really felt respected. And as a result, I ended up sort of, instead of, I took this kind of personally, I almost felt disrespected. And I basically just, my efforts and my attention just went. And I found myself kind of, just drinking days away, ostensibly because, I was in a business development role, so I'd be out and about. And I really started to kid myself. And this kind of just snowballed, this kind of like bad behavior, day drinking, habitually drinking. I would take drugs as well if they were offered. And this came I got sacked from this job, ended up in another one. I went to Zurich. I was working in financial services there. Ended up with this kind of pretty unhealthy expat lifestyle. And I think it was 2017, 9th of June, 2017, I came to this realization after another really long bender that I was, I'd really fallen a long way from where I was. I'd been a previously happy sort of, quite successful polo player. I'd been, always had a healthy weight. Suddenly I was like 105 kilos. I could, I couldn't walk up the stairs without getting out of breath. I was constantly hungover, tired. I didn't have any, I went to my job, but I didn't really enjoy it. I'd lost all kind of sense of, fun, everything. And so I woke up, or not actually woke up, before I went to bed on the 9th of June. I really made this kind of commitment to myself that I was going to, try and turn this around. That was my rock bottom moment. So the next morning I woke up, and I called some key people, my parents, my sister, my ex-girlfriend, and I said, yeah, I've got to tell you something. I'm an alcoholic. And everybody without fail said, well, we know that, we've been trying to tell you for some time. And I said, wow, I'm really sorry. I missed that. But, I recognize it now. I'm going to try and turn it around. So on that day, I did two things. I signed up for the London Marathon. I'd never run a marathon before. I'd never been much of a runner before. And when I played polo, I was kind of fit, but fit from riding horses. And I didn't really, I didn't really do any training outside of riding. I might have played a bit of squash or, done a few runs at the beginning of the season just to try and get a bit of winter weight off. But I'd never been really a fit person, although people, would have said, oh, that guy's a fit guy. So I signed up for the London Marathon. And I signed up for Landmark, which is a personal development course, 3-day personal development course. And that was kind of really set this, that and this admission to the people close to me really set me up for, the journey that I've been on since. And I think it's something that has, all things are cumulative, and it just has snowballed really. I started with the London Marathon, then I started climbing. I started with Kilimanjaro. Then, pretty soon after I did a single day ascent of Mont Blanc. And then from there, it took, it just kept going up to a steeper trajectory. And in 2021, I was on an Everest expedition during the COVID pandemic. So 2022, I rode the Atlantic. It's been great. Lots of things have happened. Lots of things are happening.
Absolutely incredible, the way that you turned that around in so many ways, and a brutally honest assessment of that process. Now, a few things I'd like to touch on here, but before we get into the sports side of things, with the running itself, and with or starting at the beginning with changing habits, because one of the things that really hits me about what you were saying there is changing a whole lifestyle. So obviously the drinking and the drugs, yes, but I'd imagine certain associations with certain people would change, certain daily routines would change. So when you were starting with that process, running, were people sort of helping you and encouraging you along, or was it entirely a self-motivated thing? Because I know you said you rang your sister, your parents, and everything. How involved were they? Because this, in my mind, feeds back to what you said right at the beginning. It doesn't matter what people say; it matters what's inside you and the goal you have, if you get what I mean. So I'd like to just touch on those early days of recovery a little bit, and then we'll move into climbing and a few other topics, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I think, I think because lots of people ask me about recovery, and they ask me on behalf of people, maybe their husband and I think the first thing about recovery is you really got to want it for yourself. You've got to really recognize that the path that you're on is bad or bad for you. And for me personally, I was just like, wow, my life isn't fun anymore. I'm not doing interesting things anymore. I didn't see like anything that I was excited about. I didn't admire myself, is the truth. Like when I played polo, I was like, wow, this is great. I'm doing something that, is great fun. We're having a great time. There's like structure here. It's serious. And I lost all that. And so, something my mum said to me on the day when I called her, she said, I said, I'm going to stop drinking now. And she said, well, let's see what you can do. And I think that is the challenge that you've got to take on. It's like, okay, people are probably disappointed in you. People are probably slightly fed up with you. You've probably done things to embarrass, maybe even humiliate yourself. The best thing is that people can forgive most things, but it's in the same way that you went downhill progressively. You've got to go uphill progressively, and so the first thing that I tried to change was how I looked physically, because I was kind of disgusted by myself. I'd ballooned to 105 kilos. The clothes that I'd had to buy, I looked at them and I was like, but these are like clown clothes, like they're enormous. So the first thing I did was set about to change that. So I think from, in the first year, I lost about 25 kilos in weight. And I just was like, I'll run this off. And it was, I think there was a few things that were happening. One was that in my mind, I was embarrassed. I was like, wow, I've really, I've let myself go. I've let people down. I'm not where I wanted to be or where I could be if I hadn't been on this trajectory. So I had this kind of sense of embarrassment and shame, and the running really helped me for that, because, I would go out running and I would think about the things that I'd done, or times I'd been rude to someone when I was drunk, or all these things. It gave me this very good time to process these thoughts. So I think the first day I probably ran about, and actually entering the London Marathon was great because that gave me a target, and it was like, and I told people I was doing that, and I started getting sponsorship, and I would tell people, hey, I'm running the London Marathon, my close friends, and they were like, you'll never do this. And I was like, well, I'm locked in now. And then they would, I ran for MenCap, and they were like, they would, donate £100 to MenCap. And then I was like, well, now I've got to do it, so that created this kind of like, social proof or social commitment. I was committed. And I think I'm also super competitive as well. So that kind of kicked in. And I think the first day I went out running, I probably ran about 2.5, 3K before I had to stop, and I walked home. Anyway, I didn't give up. I kept doing it every day. And I remember like the first time I actually moved back from Switzerland not long after, and I lived quite near Hyde Park. And I remember the first time I could do a whole loop of Hyde Park without stopping, being like, wow, that's amazing. And then I would extend the loop down to Shepherd's Bush, and then these loops started getting bigger and bigger, and they would go out to the river. And I think that also gave me confidence. I was like, wow, I'm progressing, I'm getting better at something. And, I started to really drastically, lose weight. Then I got into calisthenics. At some point, I started to become, really in shape and get this muscle mass, and this all kind of fed this confidence. But the first part was hard. Like learning to run, getting through the bit where it just constantly hurts until the point where it actually starts to feel good. But if you can hang in there long enough and get to that bit, it's one of the best feelings you'll ever have.
Absolutely. It's powerful advice in there for people who are going through the same thing. And not to throw a cliche out there, but what one person can do, another can do. And I really think that through that process, you are inspiring people. Yes, everyone's journey is a little different, but the principles stay the same, don't they? So, touching on it very briefly, finishing the London Marathon and that achievement in itself, I'd like to touch on that because that's the cherry on top of this first phase of your journey of recovery, and it certainly sounds like the self-respect is a big part of it as well, because you mentioned being disrespected in that job, but one of the things that really comes to my mind is you started to get that back. So finishing what you set out to do with the London Marathon, can we give a brief mention to that, please, as well?
Well, funnily enough, actually, it was a 2-year project in the end, because about a month before the London Marathon, I was running down a street in London on one of my final training roads, and I just fell off the curb, and I really quite badly injured my ankle. And so I didn't run in that London Marathon. I got my entry deferred, and very sort of embarrassingly, I had to contact all these people saying, listen, I've had this injury, I can't do it. And everyone replied saying, oh, we knew you'd do that. But in a way, it was kind of like it was the best thing for me. I've actually just been talking to somebody else about how everything that happens to you happens for a reason. And that actually was great because, I could have almost at that point started drinking again and been like, well, I've done almost a year off and, I made some progress. But actually, having that injury, I was like, well, I'm doing it next year. Obviously, I need to continue training. Obviously, I can't backslide on the weight and the fitness. Another thing I should say is that the realization I was an alcoholic took time. That took time to sink in because, I think alcoholism isn't something necessarily that it's not something you can diagnose. Yes, there's like the George Best, or there's the person that you see that's homeless, people that have very obvious problems with drinking. Mine was slightly more subtle. It was a kind of, like dysfunctional, but over time, I started to see, wow, I had such a dysfunction, getting blackout drunk, all these kind of things that, in our, things that are normalized and behavior that you normalize over a period of time, I came to see wasn't normal and actually was a type of alcoholism. So I then had this, I had this injury setback. I had to take a few months off. I started training again, I think in the September, and was deferred for the next year. Carried on training. I got to the London Marathon. It was one of the best days of my life. Definitely. I think it's the best side of London you can see. If anyone that lives in London or visits London, do it, because you'll never see London in a better spirit or condition than the London Marathon. Excuse me. The race itself was, you turn up, at the start, it's a great atmosphere. My race, I went really well. I hit the wall at like mile 19 and I had to basically walk the rest. I think I finished in about 4 hours 30. So I was a bit, I was happy to finish. I was a bit disappointed. I was immediately looking for another marathon and I wanted to improve my time. I've since improved my PB. I've done a 3:40 now, but I got injured in that one. But I think so. I don't know if I can come back for running, but yeah, I would say the London Marathon is one of the best things I've done. It is unbelievable.
Absolutely. It's incredible from as well from the way you turned it around to an achievement like that. Absolutely amazing. And Yeah, the fact it didn't happen the first time, but you kept going, it happened the second time. It's incredible. Now, to touch on a couple of things with these other challenges that you've taken on in terms of Everest, in terms of rowing across the Atlantic, it is obviously is a transformative experience for you personally. So I'm curious with this, what it was that inspired you to move out of just one thing. So obviously you've been running during this time and building that up, but then the diversity of okay, climbing, rowing, these other types of challenges. Because I heard what you said about a downward spiral becoming sort of an upward spiral, if you like, and that makes a lot of sense. So I'd imagine that was a part of the process. But in terms of the initial inspiration, saying, right, okay. I want to visit Everest. I want to row across the Atlantic. How did those ideas first come to you? What sort of lit the fire inside of you for that side of things?
Yeah, I mean, so I did the London Marathon, and I didn't consider myself a runner. I didn't consider myself an athlete. I didn't consider myself anything. I just was like a guy that, I knew that my well-being was intrinsically linked to my weight and, to how I looked and felt physically. So I enjoyed the challenge of the marathon. I didn't wake up the next day like I've got to do more marathons. I've got to do more challenges. I did have this idea though that I needed to celebrate being sober for 2 years because I'd been someone that used to drink the whole time. Not so much when I played polo, but in the off season and when I finished, I drank all the time. So to have had 2 years without a single drink, I considered this like monumental for me personally. So I was like, I want to do something to celebrate this. I'm gonna give myself a gift, and I wanted to do some kind of challenge. And I love traveling, so I think I settled quite quickly on climbing Kilimanjaro. I don't know quite how this was seeded, but anyway, I signed up to do this Kilimanjaro. I looked at a few companies. I found one that they had an ascent that pretty much I landed on the summit on the 2 year anniversary. And I went to Tanzania. I'd never really done any hiking before. Maybe, I was in the Army Cadets when I was at school. It was mandatory. We had a weekend in Brecon. I remember it being a very long hike, being pretty miserable, being pretty fed up as a teenager. Hadn't really done a long hike since then. Before Kilimanjaro, I wanted to wear my boots in, so I went down to Snowdonia, climbed Snowdon, camp, did a wild camp down there, enjoyed it, but never really imagined what would happen. But I went to Tanzania and I had this very, very profound experience. I think partly because, I had to keep pinching myself. I couldn't believe that, I was, I know because I had been sporty, but, I then came to see myself as not sporty. I'd been very overweight. I wasn't really like a physical person. I'd never really enjoyed like hiking or anything like that. So suddenly, I'm hiking up, on the second or third day of Kilimanjaro and this huge mountains in front of me. And I had to really pinch myself, and I just couldn't quite believe how far I'd come. Really enjoyed the climb. The summit night I found really hard. I got altitude sickness. It was difficult, but I went to the summit and I came down and I was pretty sort of like, I was like, oh, that's great. I'm glad I've done it, but I'm never doing this kind of thing. That was my first feeling having done it. I then went down the next day because you come down and you have one night more on the mountain. And I got to the end, and this sort of kind of like euphoria started to slowly come onto me that it had been a really incredible experience. And it was, I think, the first time I ever played polo or went for a polo lesson, I had this similar thing. I was like, I had this, sensation that I was hooked. And that really happened with the climbing. And I came back to England, and straight away I was, up to Scotland to climb Ben Nevis, and literally just took off from there. I think, that was in 2019, and I think that winter was the start of the pandemic. I went winter climbing in Scotland for a week. Because I remember I came back from Kilimanjaro, I went straight to Ben Nevis, and one of my friends, I posted on Facebook, and one of my friends said, "No, you have to climb Ben Nevis in winter. In summer doesn't count." So I was straight back as soon as it was December. And I remember doing like a night climb of Ben Nevis in winter, just so I could say, take a video of myself, send to my friends saying, it's nighttime in winter. And basically, then the pandemic started. During this point, I took my training to like a totally different level. I mean, I was doing like at least 3 hours a day. I would run, the minimum I would run was 10K. I think I ran, and I started doing like these running challenges, like the David Goggins 4x4 challenge. You run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours, 4x4 by 48. I would run, I did 100K, I did 100K in a week. And I was like, oh, I've done 100K in a week. Now I'm going to do 100 miles in a week. So I would do things like that. I would do hours and hours of calisthenics. I would train in the garage of where I was living. I would train on a bench. So I would do like, I'll do 1,000, sorry, I'll do 1,000 meters. I'll do a 10K run, come back and I'll do 1,000 meter climbing. And then I'll go for another 10K run. So this step up on this bench was 60 centimeters. So I would divide, 1,000 meters by 60. And I had this little clicker and I'd do the step up, step down, step up, go up 1,000 meters, then go out on another 10K run. And I would just literally just train like this the whole time. This is during the pandemic. Got in super shape. I signed up for Mont Blanc, did all the training in my garage. I went out in the middle of the pandemic. You couldn't get a flight to Geneva or Lyon, so I had to fly to Paris. I rented this van because it was the only car I could afford for that length of time. I drove this van from Paris to Chamonix. I stayed in Chamonix in this tiny B&B for like 3 weeks. It was incredible. And by then it was just like the fire was raging, in terms of like, how I felt about mountaineering and mountains and climbing. And did a ton of climbing out there. I had this IFMGA guide, Ben Bradford, who really helped me. Yeah, and it just went from there and there, just up and up.
That is incredible. I mean, your passion for climbing obviously just is tangible. I mean, it shows. I can feel it, even across this Zoom. Now, a couple of things to touch on here with this topic. I'd like to briefly touch on Everest, and I'd like to briefly touch on the Atlantic. But then after that, being mindful of time, I need to talk about your business as well and what you do with inspiring other people to climb and guiding them and everything. But obviously with Everest and with the Atlantic, given where you've come from and given everything you've achieved, I would sort of kick myself if we didn't at least mention it even briefly in this talk. So can we touch on those two back to back in terms of your experiences with Everest? I know that wasn't a summit, but even getting there is an incredible thing to be doing,
Yeah, well, I never imagined, so when I was that summer in Chamonix, I came back, the pandemic was in full swing. I did the London Virtual Marathon then, actually, and that's when I got my best time, 3:40. During the race, I really beat my ankle up. I woke up the next morning, I couldn't bear weight. I didn't go to A&E because it was the pandemic. So I was furious with myself because at this point I was training for Ironman. And so, I had this like anxiety that I would go backwards in my fitness. So I took myself to Tenerife a few days later and I just started training in the pool. I found this like an Airbnb in Los Cristianos where they had a 50-meter pool. I rented a bike for a month and I just literally went, I did 2 training sessions a day. I couldn't run. And I had 3 things I would do. One was the gym. The other was swimming in this 50-meter pool. The other was cycling. So I would do 2 of the 3 things every day. And I did a 32-day camp there and I only had 3 rest days. And I did 2 sessions on every day. It was one of the best months I've ever had by myself. Anyway, carried on training. Then I came back to England. It was Christmas, and then the lockdown was getting going again. So I was desperate to get out and climb. So I found a guy in Ecuador, Ossi Frere. He's an IFMGA guide, very good climber. I found him on Instagram. He basically said, "Listen, we don't have a lockdown here. We can't afford it. The third world. If you can get here, I've got an expedition happening next week." So I think this was the end of January. I went to Heathrow Airport. I was like, well, the police will probably stop me, whatever. We've all been told not to travel. Suddenly, I got on this plane to Madrid. I was in Madrid, and I was on the plane to Ecuador, and I've never been so happy in my life. Got to Ecuador, and I spent 3 months there climbing. And when I was there, was on this 10-day expedition with this guy, Aussie. He had two clients and they were going to Everest. Nice people from Mexico, two women. But in my mind, I was kind of like, well, I'm as good as these girls and they're going to Everest. So I should be going too. But I didn't really have any money. So I started like, how can I needed $30,000 or $40,000 or something like that. So I started, like I had to, I had some things I sold. Anyway, I scraped together the money for this expedition. And I arrived in Kathmandu. I didn't even know if I was going to do it because I didn't have all the money when I arrived. Some last minute things happened. A couple of friends helped me, gave me loans, and it really gave me this kind of faith in the universe. It was like I went. This was during the pandemic as well. I mean, no one was traveling, and I just, it was something that I made. It was amazing that I made happen, and there was a lot of goodwill. I got sponsored. Someone reached out to me on Instagram. They said, "You climbing Everest?" And I said, "Look, maybe I'm just trying to get it together." And they were like, "What do you need?" I said, "Well, I'm a bit short on funds." And they said, "My company will sponsor you." And they sent me 5K. Things like that happened. Another friend said, "Are you going to do it?" And I said, "I'm a bit short of cash." The next thing I know, he'd sent me $5,000. It was in my bank account. Things like this. It was like a magical thing. Anyway, I get to the base camp. It was a pretty rough time, spring 2021. A lot of people had COVID. A lot of people were getting sick. But the expedition went ahead. We went up. It was a pretty magical time, I have to say. It was incredible. It was disappointing I didn't summit. I really sort of saw myself summiting because I felt like I'd been through so much to get to that point. I touched Camp 3 on my acclimatization, which is 7,000 meters, but I was super sick. I had this terrible chest infection. I came down, people were going, the people in the tents next to me both had given up, gone home. They were sick. Two people in our group died. Yeah, it was pretty rough. I took myself back to Lukla and just checked into this tea house there and spent a week there. And I knew I was sick because I don't sleep that much. I normally do like 6-7 hours a day, and I was sleeping like 18 hours a day. I would wake up, go to like the sort of mess hall, eat like 3 meals, and then go back to my room and sleep for another 18 hours. And I just did the same thing for 8 days. At some point, I was like, well, I got to go and try for the summit. And so I went back to base camp and I went to Camp 2, which is where you launch from. And as soon as I got there, I got this fever, and it was pretty miserable. I was in the down suit, in the sleeping bag during the storm. Had this like fever. 1 minute I was hot, 1 minute I was cold, and I stayed there for about 4 or 5 days, just trying to get the strength together. But in the end, I decided to go down, and I actually had to get a heli evac down. I wasn't in good shape, so it was a shame. But it was a great time. I loved it. I mean, I met some amazing people. I met the people that are my business partners in the pool now. I met some amazing alpinists. David Gottler, who's a North Face athlete, became a friend of mine. It was a great time.
Absolutely incredible experience. Now, when it comes to your business that you do now in terms of climbing and in terms of guiding people and really sort of giving back and contributing to people through adventure and through the transformational quality of adventure. Now, this is something that you've been through in your own life, and I'm just thinking, I'm just resisting temptation to go off on tangents here because what you said about the synchronicity and everything, that's a great topic. But just in terms of your business, we need to talk about that because what's cool about this is you've been on this inner journey. It really has spiritual qualities to me listening to this. But in terms of the decision to, okay, I've had this experience, I need to give this experience to other people, is that what sort of started the wheels in motion with climbing full time and taking people on tours and this type of thing? Same thing as before, in terms of the initial inspiration of where that came from to take this experience beyond yourself having it and give that to other people, if you get what I mean with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think something that's true is that you always need a push, or you need someone, when people, you need a lift from somebody. And in the same way that my friend Henry helped me with the Everest expedition, somebody else helped me with this, having this realization that I should do this full time. There was a business that I was working on in real estate, and there was somebody whose advice I wanted that I didn't know, but I knew of. I knew of him from polo. He was a team owner, and I messaged him on Facebook, and he started following me. And he was in recovery as well, so he started taking a bit of an interest in me. And I said, "Listen, I'm working on this thing, but I need a bit of help." And he said, "Well, listen, how about this? You could take me on a climbing trip. I'll bring the guys from my office, and you'll have, you can ask us anything about what it is you're trying to achieve and how to get there." Anyway, so I took these 10 private equity guys to Ben Nevis. We climbed Ben Nevis. We had a really good weekend. On the way back, from the airport to London, I was in a taxi with the main guy, and I started my pitch to say, "Listen, this is, I've done that for you. This is what I need from you now." And I was about to start. As I start talking, he said, "Listen, I've been talking to the guys, and we all agreed, you should focus on climbing. You're a climber. Whatever you're working on," he said, "whatever you're working on, forget it. You should focus on climbing." So that was kind of the sort of, the realization that I needed, that actually, what I've been working on hadn't really been progressing. I didn't really enjoy it, and I actually had a talent at something, and that was, showing people my passion. So the next week, I signed up with a great guy, Chris Ensel. He's an IFMGA guide. I signed up for his mountain leader course in the Lake District, and I was there in the Lake District doing this mountain leader course. And from that, then I was like, well, I'm going to have my own business. And it actually worked well, because I was at this point, I was already signed up for the Atlantic Row. The Atlantic Row was a huge burden on my time. And so, it was a struggle for me financially, but I couldn't, realistically, I couldn't have had a normal job and done the amount of training that I did for the Atlantic Row. So it was great. I got the mountain leader qualification. I started my business. We had the first expedition. I filled it. I did mountain leader jobs, Duke of Edinburgh, whatever I could, just, to get some income in. Meanwhile, trying to get the business going, having this launch. We had the first Kilimanjaro expedition, and it kind of went from there. So I can't say that, I had this like realization I wanted to, but that actually, I think you learn by actually doing, and so actually going, seeing that I enjoyed it, seeing that other people got something from it, that's where it came from. And then when I had the first Kilimanjaro expedition, I just put out on my social media, "Hey, who wants to go to Kilimanjaro with me?" 10 people signed up. It was great. Those people had an amazing time. And then they signed up for the next one, Everest Base Camp Trek. So, it's grown slowly. I can't say it's exploded yet, but it's great. It's nice to take other people. It's nice to have something that every morning I'm excited about.
Absolutely. And for the sake of this, while we're on this topic, if people do want to reach out to you and get involved in this type of thing, best way to do that, I'm guessing, is reach out on social media, contact you, reach out through your website, maybe. Just give yourself a little plug with this in case
So my Instagram is @lettersfromoliver, and my business is called True Summit Adventures. I love the name. When I was on the Everest expedition, there was a great guy from Malaysia, Sui Chow, who's a guy in his late 50s. He's one of the greatest adventurers I've ever met. Climbed all the 8,000ers, cycled from Beijing to Istanbul. He's from the English Channel, done incredible things, but very, very modest. And I remember once asking him, "Hey, have you climbed Manaslu?" Manaslu is the 8th highest mountain in the world. And he said, "Yeah, I've climbed Manaslu, but I haven't been to the true summit." And I said, "What do you mean the true summit?" And he said, "Well, I've been to the commercial summit." And what used to happen in a lot of commercial expeditions was that, the actual true summit was, it was kind of difficult to get to. On Manaslu, you had to like traverse this so basically they just stopped at this commercial, what is the commercial summit. They didn't bother doing the last meter and a half. And so, this kind of realization that, yeah, I've climbed Manaslu, but not properly. I haven't been to the true summit. So I just thought this was a great name, because it sort of invokes something like, actually doing something like properly, doing it to the best of your ability. So, the true summit, I just loved that. I was like, oh my God, I had no idea that people weren't ever climbing to the true summit. And so that's where the name was born. So we're at True Summit Adventures, and we're www.truesummitadventures.com.
Absolutely incredible. And of course, you're repping the brand there as well. So very cool. Now, obviously, I'm mindful of your time. So with this in mind, I think we can fit in two things. I want to ask you about your future plans, and I want to ask you about the Atlantic row, and then we'll have to wrap things up because I know you have places to be. Now, with the Atlantic row itself, we probably don't have time for the level of preparation, although you have touched on that. What I mean by that is covering your preparation. But in terms of the experience, I'd like to touch on that just because it's absolutely incredible. And I've interviewed people who've done amazing things with mountaineering and ultra running and all types of crazy stuff. The Atlantic Row, this is a first. So personally, I'd love to touch on that. Then just to touch on your future plans after that, and we'll wrap it up from there because you have places to be. But in terms of the Atlantic Row and in terms of the experience, the things that stay with you from that experience, the things you learn from that experience, things that people may not know about doing something of that magnitude. So there's a few different things, but basically that experience in your own words would be awesome to hear about.
Yeah, so the Atlantic Road, I did the race. So there's an annual race from the Canary Islands to Antigua. I think it's been going since the 80s, and it's now a quite, well subscribed event. It's normally sold out a few years in advance. There was 45 teams when I did it last year. You can do it as a solo, as a pair, a trio, a quad, or as a five. And the four is the most common combo. And I did it as a four with three friends. Um, it's a great event. It's very well organized, as you would expect. I hadn't done any rowing before being asked. I just done mountaineering. After the Everest expedition, we did a warm-up race from Barcelona to Ibiza, and that made me see, that it was a proper sport. I would get a lot out of it. I think, I've actually found the race straightforward, but I think that was because we were so well prepared. We put so much into it, and I was pretty used to being uncomfortable by that point. I'd done so much. I think I did 30 nights wild camping in the year before. So, you're sleeping in this tiny cupboard that's, one end of the boat. It's pretty cramped and uncomfortable. But I'd had so many nights like that, for me, I was just so happy. Just, it was for me, it was like a month off. It was like a vacation. It was like, living in a small studio apartment. It was just like a break from normal life. I loved it. And so I didn't find it particularly difficult. Obviously, there was times where you were super fatigued. You could be uncomfortable, cold, wet, but it was pretty straightforward. I think the main lessons, that I took from it is that you need less than you think. I had one pair of shorts and one long sleeve t-shirt and some these like pads that I wore on my hands. Yeah, and a sun hat and sunglasses. And I survived for 32 days like that. You need, you were talking about at the beginning, moving house, you find out you've got all this stuff that you're not using. you know that was the main takeaway, is that you need a lot less than you think, and you can be happy with a lot less than you think. And if anyone's feeling slightly lost or unhappy, it's like, don't focus on material things, focus on experiences with other people, even if it's something as simple as going to the Lake District for a weekend's walking and camping in the Langdale Valley. These are like the most valuable experiences you can have. So I knew that, because of the experiences, I knew it was going to be powerful. I knew it was going to be amazing. I remember, there were other teams that were, very well fancied. We were a bit under the radar. I knew we were going to do well. We came second in the race, but I knew we were going to do well. I just couldn't wait to get out there. On the morning of the race, I could see people were nervous. I couldn't wait to get out there. For me, it was a holiday.
Wow, absolutely incredible. And I think that's testament to some of your other achievements, that something like that was a break. But again, transformative experience for you. Wonderful. Now, in terms of your future plans, this is potentially quite a big topic, so I don't mind how far forward you'd like to go or how close to the present. But in terms of the fire inside of you is obviously still burning brightly. So in terms of what you're aiming for personally in terms of these challenges, but also in terms of your business and True Summit and getting more people involved in that. It's quite a broad topic, but your future plans in your own words basically would be great to hear about.
Well, I'd love to see the business become, something not substantial, not something that, that I need to make a ton of money from, but something that people use, that people enjoy, that is well regarded and well thought of in the industry. I think that's important to me. I'd love to see more people climb in South America because I think the climbing in South America is so good. We obviously go to Europe a lot. We go to the Himalayas a lot. British people are climbing in Pakistan as well, but I think the Himalayas is the Andes is so underrated. I think people go to Argentina, they do Aconcagua, but Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia, these are incredible places to climb. So I want to get those trips going. I want to be considered one of the leading provider of those South American trips, at least amongst the European operators. I'm going to continue taking people to the Himalayas. I love it. I love Nepal. I got the best partners in Nepal, Seven Summits Treks, who I did the Everest expedition with. So I want to see that all grow. I want to see some people graduate, some people that I started on Kilimanjaro. I want to see one of those guys or girls climb Everest. I think we'll have a commercial Everest expedition in the next few years, hopefully in the autumn season, because that's not really been done before, that people climb commercially in autumn. But I'd like to see that, me and my Nepali partners pioneer that as an idea, because it's so crowded in spring season now. So I'm talking to them about that. I've got City Summit Club, which is this not-for-profit I'm doing that we started in the summer, which is we did the Seven Sisters hike. So it's a free to join initiative. So I'd like to see that become like a regular monthly thing that, is almost automated, and that grow. I'd like to see, I'd love to have some link up with, like a school, or, I'd like to see, somebody, come out of one of my, like City Summit Club, or, a partnership with a school. I'd like to see somebody, from a, disadvantaged background climb a big mountain. And I think for me personally, there's two things I want to do. One is climbing out 8,000er, and one is do a cross-continental cycle. So I think those are the two main things on my list. And it's always changing. People say, hey, do you want to do this? Someone contacted me about doing this horse race in Mongolia. It's 1,000 kilometers, so maybe I would do that. But I'd like to do an 8,000 meter ascent. And I'd like to do a cross-continental cycle. Those are my two main ambitions.
Absolutely incredible. Well, the future obviously is very bright for you. But in the meantime, I'd like to just thank you for your time today. A few things. I'm impressed that we've managed to condense as much into an hour as we have, because it's something I enjoy about what I do, but it is the tricky aspect of I speak to somebody and I think, right, okay, they've got this, they got this, they got this. How on earth are we going to pack that in? But we have. But more importantly than that, as well as the adventures and the fun stories and all of that type of thing, what's really cool about it is throughout this talk, it's laced with the lessons you've learned along the way. It's really quite a gold mine of knowledge. So I'm very happy with that, because that's why I do these. And when people listen to this, there's a lot that they can gain that is, I think, applicable to different life areas. You don't have to be a climber or a runner. It can be a different sport, or it can be some of the things you said apply to business, to education, to different things. And obviously, what we've talked about with recovery and people, anyone going through that who's listening to this, or anyone who knows someone who's going through that. So there's quite a few different things we've managed to touch on. So I guess the last thing for me to do is just to thank you for your time, and thank you for being, as I always say, an open book. Because some of the things we've touched on here, you've given a really brutally honest assessment. Some of the things are quite personal with the recovery side of things. So I'm very grateful for all of it. Much appreciated.
No, it was great to talk. I mean, I would say for people that that want to drink less, or consider themselves in recovery, running is one of the best things you can do. And that's one of the things that makes me so happy now. Is when, like in the summer, I went climbing in Peru. unguided, no porters, totally unsupported, climbing, 6,000s there, carrying all my own gear. And I was just kind of like, I couldn't believe, I was pinching myself because, when I started, I couldn't run 3K. And then, here I was, I got this, I'm now actually managing myself in hostile environment. So, it's just a case of, you just got to keep layering it on, stacking and stacking and stacking. And when you think, like you run them, you do the London Marathon 440, sign up immediately for another one in 6 months' time and be like, right, I'm going to beat 4 hours. And you just keep like taking it forward. It's amazing. It doesn't happen overnight, but I'm pretty sure some good things will happen to me in the next 10 years, just on the trajectory. As long as I keep making progress, keep trying. I want to start a new training program at the moment. I found a really good trainer in London. I want to get into really, really good shape this time. So yeah, just keep going, keep stacking, keep running, keep doing everything.
Absolutely. Well, that's a powerful lesson in and of itself, the accumulative effect of these things, trajectory. As you said earlier, putting this into an upward climb, it's absolutely incredible. And the evolution, isn't it? I mean, really, your story, one thing has really led to another, one thing's evolved to another. You've had a few good lucky experiences as well. So I definitely think something's looking out for you, if you know what I mean with that as well. But it's been absolutely incredible. Thank you again for your time. And if you ever want to do another one of these down the road after you've done one of those other challenges with the long cycle that you mentioned, or some of those other things, you'd be more than welcome to come back
Great.
as well. So, but yeah, it definitely helps inspire some people. I hope it helps as well. Give things a little push for you with True Summit and with life in general. So good on all counts, my friend. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.